Oh, hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Brian House here for Housework, and today we are going to be demystifying the tracking system on a 2x72 grinder. Now, if you haven't already watched the prototype build series, I suggest you do so. I'll throw a card right up here. You can go back and kind of see the process of the design and putting this thing together. This is the second grinder that I've actually built. The first one was a very simple, rudimentary design. It was based on Dan's design from DC Knives. I really enjoyed the process and I enjoyed owning the tool, and I didn't realize how deep I would actually get into 2x72 grinders, nor did I realize that I would actually become a manufacturer of them. And I'm starting a small business where I will offer the parts and pieces and all that. But that's for another video. Today we're going to really just be talking about tracking. Tracking is one of those things that if you don't understand it, it can be really difficult for you to sort of tune up your grinder. I spent almost all day yesterday messing around with the tracking on this thing because I'm building the platen face, and this particular piece right here, the platen. I needed a way to understand how much distance I needed between the platen face and the tooling arm. And I started getting confused on, okay, if I turn it this way and do this, you know, all the different angles made a huge difference when I was even just a minute. I mean, we're talking 1/16 of an inch. If I turn that tracking wheel just slightly, I would see enormous shifts in the way that the belt would move. And it's really important, especially when a belt is turning, you know, 3,000-4,000 RPM. If it's not tracking properly, it's dangerous. Number one. Number two, if you don't have your tracking system set up correctly, what you'll find is you can make it track properly on the face of the platen, and that is fine and dandy, but if your tracking wheel is all cockeyed and twisted just to make that happen, your tracking is not set up correctly, or there's something majorly wrong with your grinder that you need to correct. And the reason is if you leave a belt on your grinder, it's going to warp the belt. So you won't notice it right away. You'll notice it the next day though. When you come back and turn on your grinder, the belt seemed fine the day before, and then that day the belt will start wobbling all over the place, and that's because overnight it sat there all twisted up on your machine. Now it's just fried, right? So you got to toss that belt out, and those things are expensive. So anyhow, today we're going to go through the process. It's actually a lot more simple than you would think. We're going to take a straight edge and a couple of little small minor tools, and we're going to tune this grinder up, and you can do the same on yours. Right here on Housework. Let's do it. So the first thing I really want to talk about is making sure that your grinder is true. And when I say that, I mean, are your wheels all in alignment, okay? If they're not, that's something you really need to take a look at. A lot of us have built our own grinders at home. You might have a wheel that's over about 1/4 of an inch this way, and perhaps your drive wheel is just a little bit off. And if that's the case, you want to try to true that up and get them as lined up as possible. And the quickest and easiest way to make that happen is actually with a straight edge. This is just a basic straight edge that I got at Home Depot or Lowe's or something. It's 4 feet long. It's aluminum, it's super light, which is kind of important. You can use a 4-foot level. You could use pretty much anything that's exactly straight. So what I'm doing now is I'm checking for, I'm looking for any variance between these two wheels. And actually, I don't see a lot right now. I'm going to set my tracking wheel at 90 degrees. I see just a slight bit, but it's not terrible. Now, I'm also going to do the exact same thing with the drive wheel. And I'm going to check it against this top wheel on my platen. And they're pretty much lined up. Now, that is not by accident. I actually designed this grinder in SketchUp, and I played around with the dimensions quite a bit in order to make that happen. One of the things I did have to do, though, to line all this up was to create a spacer right here. In between the platen face and the tooling arm, there's about a 3/4 inch piece of stock steel that just sits right there to push this platen over just enough to make sure that all of those wheels are aligned. That's super important. If you don't have that, all of this is going to be for naught. You're going to have a hard time tuning your 2x72 grinder. So it looks like everything's kind of in alignment right now, but I want to throw a belt on it just to see what the belt looks like, and I can kind of eyeball things and take another look. Also, this tracking mechanism up here is what's known as a floating tracking mechanism, which means it can turn this way and it can turn this way. So on the X and Y axes, and then also with the tensioning spring, it can go down, up and down on the Z axis. That all plays a role in what we're doing here, including the actual angle that this wheel is sitting up against the platen, and this wheel is sitting up against the platen, and this one as well. What I have done in the past is tightened and loosened these bolts just to see if I loosen this bolt up to get a little more play on the bearing, it actually creates a pretty interesting effect. This, by loosening this bolt, it drops the outside edge of this wheel just slightly, and that actually creates enough warpage for the belt to travel in one or the other direction. And you wouldn't think it, but just a minor adjustment like that makes an enormous difference. So you really want to make sure when you're building your platen or you're building your grinder in general that you're checking your dimensions, your angles when you're drilling your holes. Something like this, if you were to use the wrong angle or just drill with a hand drill and go through it, you could potentially drill it at an angle, in which case the bolt will be sitting at an angle in that platen, in which case your tracking will be a nightmare. All right, let's throw a belt on this thing and see what she's got. I'm going to use a pretty stout belt, 36 grit VSM ceramic belt. I'm just turning the belt by hand, and I'm feeling for a couple of things. One is I'm feeling for the amount of tension that I have on the belt. This feels pretty good to me. It's a little soft. I do like my belts a little bit tighter, and the reason is I can predict the tracking a little bit better with a tighter belt. But a looser belt has a little bit more play in it and is not as harsh against the platen. So you kind of have to find a happy medium. In this case, I think this is a good place to be for tuning and adjustment. Now, as I roll this way, I feel the belt kind of going back and forth, but nothing too major. Now, this adjuster right here is actually going to turn the tracking wheel up and down on this axis, okay? And that's the quickest way to get left and right adjustment on the forward platen. So I'm going to turn the belt towards myself, and I'm going to adjust that just slightly. And you'll see everything's starting to come into alignment. Now, in order to make this happen, I really want this belt to sit properly against this forward-facing platen here. This is important to me. And I really want to be able to make minute adjustments to bring that belt left and right, because sometimes when I'm grinding on this thing, I actually want to utilize that edge. I can grind into that edge a little bit, but I can't do it on both sides. I only have 2 inches and my forward-facing platen is 2 inches, so I need to be able to make that adjustment. So as I'm moving along here, I can turn that back and I can bring it over, and now I have a little bit more belt on this side. That's actually a really important feature of any 2x72 grinder. You want to be able to have that axis. If you don't, you're kind of behind the 8 ball on a lot of grinding. And notice I haven't turned the machine on yet. For safety reasons, the power is off to this thing. I don't have anything turned on. It's just even the breaker is shut off. I'm just doing this all by hand, because in reality, you can do this all by hand to start. Okay, so as I'm going along, I'm looking at it going, yep, that looks good, and I'm not really going to get too crazy with it, turn it on and go up to 50% and make this thing go nuts. I really want to get it dialed in by hand first, okay? So in this particular grinder, I'm able to actually reverse the belt. So as I push the belt backwards, you can see it pretty much stays right where I want it to go. It's not vibrating back and forth. It hasn't really turned too much from one side or the other. But I do notice there is a little bit of warping on the belt. It's actually cattywampus to the forward-facing platen when I go in reverse. Now, I don't know the science behind that. I don't understand it. It also does it when I turn the grinder horizontally. I'm not 100% sure why. It seems to turn pretty true, even horizontally, but it's just slightly off. Not a big deal. But now if you go in reverse, you can see that it is actually just slightly turned that way. And I think it has something to do with the angles that are created on both of the tracking wheel and the drive wheel. In this process, especially with a home-built grinder, you're really only going to want to find a happy medium. You're not going to get this thing perfect. Okay, so now let's adjust the floating tracking mechanism up here. I want to show you what happens when you just make minor adjustments to this guy up here, all right? And when I say minor, we're talking very minor. I'm going to loosen the bolt, and we're going to just kick it back about a 1/16 of an inch. That's it. That's all I did. Look at how much that 1/16 of an inch, the difference it made, okay? It pushed my belt about a 1/2 inch, I would say almost 3/4 of an inch over to the right, okay? So by pushing the tracking mechanism back towards the motor, we've now essentially created an angle where by the time the belt reaches the front-facing platen, it is now moving slightly that way. All right, so let's go ahead and turn it the other direction. We're going to actually just slightly pull the tracking mechanism and wheel towards the forward-facing platen. Let's see what that makes it do. All right. So, now we're grinding up against this top steel plate here. So it's moved that far. Again, this is a 1/16 of an inch here. We're not talking an enormous amount of travel. So you can see if you build your grinder and you don't pay attention to the angles in which you're setting everything, tracking is going to be a little bit of a nightmare. All right, so I'm going to loosen this bolt, and I made a handy little mark on the steel here so I can tune it right back to where I need it to be, because this is a huge pain in the butt to get this right. Not quite there yet. Loosen this up a little more. A little more. All right. Now we're coming back to where we want to be. Let's go in reverse. Reverse looks pretty good. So now that we've got the floating platen working in this direction, let's just talk briefly about the actual tracking mechanism that lifts and lowers this particular tracking wheel. Every single grinder needs this. You don't always have to have the first part of the adjustment that we talked about, but every single 2x72 grinder needs the wheel to be able to move up and down. And if you don't have that, you're really not going to have any success tuning your grinder. The only real way I can show you this is by turning this on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and try to get some information out to you. It's not real loud. The grinder itself is actually pretty quiet, but I think we can make this happen. Okay, so I always start with my VFD down at 0. I'm going to change the direction to forward and then hit the start button. Now that that's happened, you can see nothing's actually moving here. We actually have to tune the dial to make that happen. We're going to just take it up to like 20%. Okay, so we're traveling pretty nice on the wheel, but I want to be able to adjust and center the belt. And you can see a tune of this knob does not take a lot for it to actually move up and down and actually adjust this. So we're talking minute changes. Just a couple of threads in the bolt. All right, so if I turn this knob down, towards us. You can see I can get a lot of travel on the belt that way. And if I turn the knob away from us, I can get travel this way, towards me. Now, let's reverse it. Let's reverse the belt and see how well this thing tracks. A tuned grinder should be able to go forward and backwards without too much hassle. And as you can see, this is tracking pretty well. And again, you can see that cattywampus belt on the forward-facing platen. It's not a huge deal to me because I'm really going to be using the slack portion of the belt up top for sharpening blades and such. But I did want the option to be able to reverse my belt. At some point, I'll probably fix the cattywampus thing. So now let's see what happens when we turn the grinder on its side. We're going to go in forward. Looking pretty good. Let's reverse it. And now you can see that issue there. I'm going to try to level this out. It's not too bad. I think I could live with it. So as you can see, tuning your 2x72 grinder is not that difficult, but what you should really pay attention to is when you're building it to make sure that you have a couple of options available to you for adjustment, and one being this tracking mechanism. Now, this particular tracking mechanism I did not build. I don't make my own aluminum wheels. I don't make my own tracking mechanisms for now. It's easy enough to go online and find them. This particular one is from Origin Blade Makers out in Oregon. I buy all my wheels and everything from those guys because they do such a great job, and honestly, I can't build them for cheaper than what they sell them to me for. So this particular tracking mechanism I slightly modified. I drilled a hole in the top that allowed me to put a bolt down in so I could actually adjust the whole thing left and right and then up and down as well. Up and down comes standard. You can do that with pretty much any tracking wheel mechanism that you put on. My old tracking mechanism worked very simply with just tube steel with sort of a sleeve that went over that held the mechanism, and it went up and down. I did not have the option for left to right so it was not considered a floating tracking mechanism. If you want to be able to reverse your belt, you're really going to want that feature. Also, if you really want a tuned grinder, you probably want that feature as well. Now, I've seen a lot of guys build very bloated, engineer-wise, they're very bloated machines that have a lot of adjusters on them and different things. You really don't need all that. You can do it with what I've done here, which is like a $50 or $60 tracking mechanism from Origin Blade Makers and a single bolt. That's pretty simple to me. The up and down mechanism, as you can see, it's really just a piece of threaded rod, or actually it's a bolt that I put through here. I tapped through my tracking arm and went all the way through, and what it does is it just basically turns this bolt, and then that bolt goes through, it touches this plate and allows that wheel to go up and down. Now, with the proper spring and mechanism in place, you can also see the entire arm sort of compress properly when it is adjusted. Again, part of a properly tuned and tensioned 2x72 grinder is allowing this particular piece to go up and down when it needs to. You don't want it to be bouncing around because your belt's going to be going back and forth, so tension is important. The springs that I used on this, actually I just got at Home Depot. They're just like a standard hardware spring. I'll create a link to that down in the description so you can find one for yourself. All right, guys, so as you can see, tuning your 2x72 grinder is really not that difficult. As long as you build your machine that is sort of true, you know, with your wheel and your mechanism all in place, you can do it. And in this design, I actually really wanted this plate here, and the reason is that my motor mounted to the plate. The face of the motor was mounted to that plate, so I knew that I had 90 degrees from the plate to the drive wheel. That was super important to me. Once I knew I had that, it was really just a matter of truing up this particular piece and making sure these were welded in place properly, and everything fell into place for me. Now, if you're interested in building one of these for yourself, there are links down in the description that will take you to my website where you can find some plans for this. I haven't actually got them completed yet, but hopefully by the time you see this video, you can go down there and purchase the plans for this particular prototype, which I am very, very happy with. There are links down in the description that will take you to my Amazon store, and inside of my store, categorized, are all the tools, pieces, and parts, and everything you see in my workshop and studio. That's a free way to support my channel. Now, if you want to take your support to the next level, I do have a Patreon page now where you can donate every month to all the work I have going on right here in my workshop. Or if you don't want a monthly fee, you can actually go to the Buy Me a Coffee link down below and buy me a coffee. I love coffee. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I truly appreciate you. If you haven't already subscribed, it would be great if you could do so, and then leave me a thumbs up. It really helps. Thanks again for watching. My name is Brian House, and this has been Housework.